Welcome to the Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. This is a weekly podcast which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or about to lose someone you know, or perhaps you're simply trying to help someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. Each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope and at times humour. A few weeks ago, radio presenter Nikki Hayes openly and honestly told her story of addiction, homelessness and the struggles that followed. On this episode of the Grief Pod, Nikki joins me to tell me what got her to that point, the grief of losing her dad and how she's been coping in the aftermath of her story being so public. How are you in the last few weeks? Because I know we've talked here and there, but you've had so much. Your story has really, really resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, I've been completely overwhelmed by the reaction to the story. Like, I knew there would be the shock factor with, you know, someone to go from RTE to living on the streets, and I kind of knew there would be that, but I did not think it would get the reach that it got. I mean, it was the number one story for like nearly a week on The Independent. Like, Niamh Horan did a great job, and I'm so thankful to her for that. But literally it just blew, and it took legs, and it walked, and then it ran, and you know, so I was quite overwhelmed. There's been a lot of attention for it's been like a month now, and you know, there's still a lot of high attention to it. So
and I think as well, like, you know, the whole, because you were so open and because you were so honest, and as you said as well, sort of you know, the RTE thing, and people sort of sometimes see RTE people in a bubble that to go from that point to rock bottom. Yeah. Has there been negative reaction? Have you found sort of people, sort of the keyboard warriors, out in force a little bit? Well, and how did you handle that?
Well, when the article first came out on the Sunday in the Sunday Independent, I did read some of the articles, and I actually got a call from Anton Savage show to come into News Talk. And when I was on my way in, I was reading some of them were really nasty. And I just made the decision at that point to stop reading them because it wasn't going to benefit me in any way. And that was the right thing to do, I think, because some people approached me in the days after that and said, oh my gosh, and some of the things I was like, do you know what? I haven't seen them, so I don't care. I mean, it was actually borderline ridiculous, some of them. I think we spoke about it a couple of weeks ago. Like, one guy said, what was his name before he transitioned? And, you know, then another one was like, did she go to rehab for eating donuts? And I'm like, okay, fair enough. I did put on weight when I was in rehab, but if you're sitting somewhere for 16 months and you're not moving, you're going to put on weight, you know?
Sorry. You are telling a story. What have these people ever done?
Yes.
You know, and the strength you've had to get to this point, you know, I just think some judgy people are never going to have that strength. Yeah. You know? Yeah. Going back to the beginning and where this catalyst started, I guess, is there something that you would see as a catalyst? Is it something that you would see as the turning point in your life?
Well, like, I mean, my father was an alcoholic, and he went into rehab when I was 4. So, you know, alcoholism was in the family. It was something that was very much there. I was very young, but I do have slight memories of him when he would have been using, when he was drunk. One in particular was when I was young. I was about 3 or 4, and we were walking home, and we were around the corner from where I lived in Bray. It wasn't a great distance. We're talking like, you know, a couple of kilometres, couple of metres from where we lived. And my dad asked me to knock into a neighbour and ask them to give us a lift home. And I remember at that point going, you know, why can't we just walk home? It's only around the corner. But like, that's the only memory that kind of sits with me. But obviously he was in such a bad state that he couldn't make it around the corner. So, but apart from that, like, he went into rehab when I was 4. He went into the Rutland Centre, and when he came out, he said I was standing in reception with my mum, and he said he looked at me, but he felt he was looking at me for the very first time, and he basically looked at me like that for his entire life. Then I could do no wrong. Everything I did, he made excuses for. He, you know, I was the light of his life, and I don't know if it was like through some sort of driven guilt or what it was that maybe he wasn't there for the first couple of years. But me and my dad were unbelievably close. I mean, it was me and him through everything. And he died when I was 27. So I had, 24 years of a great dad. Yes, I had 4 years of a drunk father, but I don't really remember
and
that.
he stayed sober.
He did, because
from then
even
on.
to the point when he was in hospice, so he was very, very ill towards the end. He had a very aggressive cancer that burst through his abdominal wall and grew on the outside of his abdomen. So it was pretty gross,
Yeah.
like it was really graphic. And he was in an awful lot of pain. And, towards the end, I think it was said to him, I'm not sure if it was someone in hospice or someone around, do you want a drink or something? And he was like, absolutely not. I'm 24 years sober. And
Wow.
I don't want to. So, even at that point when he knew he was facing the end, the last thing he ever wanted was a drink to pass his lips again. So,
Wow. So it stuck with him.
yeah, it stuck with him. So the trauma, I don't know what he went through. Like I say, I was very young. It wasn't something that was spoken about. I mean, it was adhered to many a time that, my father was this, my father was that. But, it wasn't really referenced or talked about, but obviously the trauma that he went under as an alcoholic stuck with him to the point that he was like, not even in these dying moments am I going to have another drink.
Wow. So you were very young when he died.
Yeah, well, I was 27. Yeah,
But that's
it is these
really
days.
young.
It is. Yeah,
It is really young. And where were you at in your career path then?
I was at the height of my career, so I was actually broadcasting on lunchtimes on 2FM. Wow. And so Dad was kind of really like dying basically for 6 months. He was in the Blackrock Hospice, and we'd keep coming in. This is it. Then we'd go home and he'd pull through, and it really got to the stage
Lazarus.
where, it came to the stage where I was going into work and I was like, these are going to think I'm making it up that he's dying, because like he's not going anywhere. Yeah. But then he did eventually pass away, and I got a text when I was on air, and it just said, that this is it now. Like he actually is. And like at that moment though, I had an hour and a quarter or something left of my show, and rather than get up and go to the Blackrock Hospice, exactly, it wasn't even that far. Like obviously, Donnybrook to Blackrock, I could have been there in minutes, but I stayed and I finished my show, and I put up the microphone and went, welcome to blah blah blah, and continued like my day was fantastic. And then pulled down the microphone and went to say goodbye to my father. So it was, it was weird. It was very kind of, high versus low, that I was at the height of my career. He was so proud of me, and I'm so glad he saw that. But yeah, like at that very moment, I lost the most important person in my life. So.
And that is some side of things that people don't see. You have to go on no matter what's just happened in your life.
Yeah.
The height of your career and your dad's passing away, that obviously you can see can be really, really difficult, because it's such a contradiction in one way. So you're sort of trying to sort of keep going, and the pressure that is on you, because, you're only as good as your last gig.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's huge pressure to keep delivering, to keep getting your figures, getting your ratings. But at the same time, you're trying to deal with your favourite person passing away. How did you do that every day?
Well, it was really difficult for me around the time that I lost my father, because in the space of 4 years, I lost 4 very important people in my life. So I lost my grandfather and my grandmother, who were integral parts of my life. They were my mum's parents, and we were very, very close to them. They took part in raising us when we were growing up. So I lost both of them. Then I lost my niece. She was stillborn, and that was that ripped my family apart, because my younger sister Caroline she was the baby, and she was having a baby, and there was huge excitement because my dad was dying, and it was like a little bit of hope into the family. And and then Holly, she was born sleeping, and that just ripped, like, it was probably one of the first times I ever saw my mum cry. She'd be quite a strong woman, and that really ripped her apart. And Dad was very ill at the time, and then obviously 2 years later he passed away. So a lot of it came, and like you say, at the time I was at the height of my career. Things were very fast paced, things were moving really, really quickly for me. So the pressure, like those 4 deaths when things were going so well, it was just like they just didn't mirror
Yin and
each
yang.
other completely because, you know, like you say, you're only as good as your last show. So I was going on full of the joys of life, but really my world was falling apart. The most important people to me were going through the most horrific things, and I was expected to go on as if everything was just brilliant, and it really wasn't. It couldn't have been further from the truth, you know?
Yeah, and, you know, anybody that's worked in radio, whatever, does know, like, you leave your troubles at the door.
Yeah.
But, you know, it is hard to do. And that actually, I think, makes what's going on, puts more stress on you because what's going on behind the scenes seems to magnify.
Yeah, well,
bit.
like at my dad's funeral, so like I was very blessed. I mean, my mum even said a lot of the people coming up shaking hands were there for me. There was a lot of people from, you know, record companies and things that came to show their support to me. And I stood up and I delivered the eulogy, and I was Mr. Strong Woman, you know, like did everything right. But I thought, okay, I've got this. I'm totally dealing with his death. It's grand. But a year later, wow, I went on a week-long bender and went missing. And then I haven't dealt with this at all. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. So where I thought, you know, I actually am dealing with this death really well. I know they say grief kind of hits people in different ways. But for me, it was like a full 12 months later before it even registered to me that he was gone.
And was that around his anniversary, or was it around?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. So he passed away on the 19th of May. And I kind of had my big breakdown as such in the June. So it would have been just a year after, yeah. Was the breakdown the start of everything then? Well, like I said before...
If you were diagnosed then with bipolar. Yeah.
BPD. Yeah, borderline personality disorder. So, like I said, for me, the addiction stuff started a long, long time ago, back when I was 11. And that kind of manifested and left and came back and left. And that was kind of like a pattern throughout my whole life. And then the mental health issues started when I was 15 with an eating disorder. There was depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicide attempts. But again, they would come and go, come and go. But it was then after that, you know, they start going, there's something bigger going on here. You know, this isn't normal that she's coming back with so many issues and we can't pinpoint what it is. But it actually wasn't that time that they pinpointed the borderline personality disorder. I had an acute mental breakdown after I gave birth to Farah, and a year after that. And it was only then, so we're only talking 10 years ago, that they actually went, right, this is what we're dealing with. So I went through from 15 to 36 with no diagnosis.
Yeah, and that's actually, you know, just I have a son with a late diagnosis of autism, who's had ADHD, was diagnosed with that. Late diagnosis then of autism because of lockdown. They couldn't, you know, it was inconclusive online. And there's times I feel we lost out on 4 years. Yeah. Of supports, of things that could have helped.
Yeah.
Do you feel that? Do you feel sort of
absolutely.
angry and like sometimes that you've lost that time where
I
you
kind
could
of
have
feel
had
that
the help?
I was thrown medication in so many different ways. So like they started me on antidepressants, sedatives, you know, they were constantly just mixing around these chemicals with me. And I don't know if they did good or did bad sometimes, you know. So, and then also I didn't get the proper treatment. I mean, in the end, when I got my diagnosis, they realised that like CBT wasn't even what needed to be done. It was DBT. And, you know, so all these things could have been done so much earlier. And like, I don't know, maybe would that have helped the addiction? Like, we don't know. We can't sit there and predict. But it certainly wouldn't have, you know, damaged it. You know, it would have helped in some way. Yeah. So I was left on the shelf for a long time. Yeah, I was left on the shelf and I self-harmed a lot. Like to this very day, I mean, it's a beautiful day today. I'm sitting here in a black long sleeve dress and leggings. I won't show my legs or my arms because I'm covered in scars from self-harm. So, you know, to this day, you'll never see me in a pair of shorts. So I've had to endure that through most of my life because I had this extreme hatred of myself. I was frustrated because I'm like, why am I so weird? Why am I so dysfunctional? You know, and I had this real loathing of myself. And maybe that could have been helped if they had just pinpointed what was going on from the start, because when they did give me the diagnosis, I did an awful lot of research on it, and through DBT I learned a lot about it, and I was like, oh God, penny is dropping, suddenly I was like, this makes sense, where before I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something with a lot of things associated with mental health. It's the more you sort of, I suppose, deep dive into it, the more it makes sense. Yeah. Because you sort of see patterns and you see behavioural things, and you go, in one way, I suppose, as a mother in my situation, you go, why didn't I see that? Why didn't, and it becomes the clearer picture.
Yeah.
And something I think there should be more, whatever it is.
Yeah.
BPD or whatever, more general sort of information and awareness about.
Yeah, especially because the more I did research on it, I mean, it's been alluded to the fact that like stars like Angelina Jolie, Princess Diana, a lot of kind of high profile people, had borderline personality disorder. And I'm like, well, you know what? This is all making an awful lot of sense. And, just I think had the conversation been there, when I was 15 compared to when I was 36, life might have just been that little bit easier. Yeah.
How did that work? Do you think your job as well, like we're talking about your dad passing away and you being on air, it's almost like you have two personalities. How do you think being diagnosed with BPD helped or didn't help that process?
It kind of did, because for a while, to be honest with you, when I thought I was losing it, I thought maybe I had a split personality, because I was like, I was very comfortable when I was Nikki Hayes, but when I went home and I was Emer, I was awkward and I felt like that self-loathing and, really just, angry at myself. I'm never outwardly angry. You will never see me have an argument with someone, but I can get very angry. Yeah, I implode is what my psychiatrist, a psychiatric nurse used to say to me, John, he was like, you implode. There is no explosion with you. It's all implosion. And that's it. Like, with
Which is worse in one way.
Well, it is, because that was where the self-harm was always such a huge thing for me. And like up until very recently, I mean, up until before I went into treatment, I would have been self-harming, and that's something they worked on when I was in there. But I just think, if a conversation had been had a long time ago, like you're saying, even for your son, it just would have opened up things, and these things were never talked about. Now, I know we're getting better, but I still think we need to get a lot better,
100%. Yeah. And I think that's across the board. Yeah. I think people need to be better people need to educate themselves, because there's always going to be somebody in your life who has a diagnosis, who needs the extra understanding or the extra help. And I think it's up to everybody to educate themselves. Yeah. Really, at this point.
And do you know what I find as well? I was actually doing an interview for a show I was doing there the other day, and I was talking to a guy, and he was saying that he does an awful lot of activist work for mental health. And he says, because now the guy was in his 50s, and he was like, because I was recently diagnosed with bipolar. And I was like, oh, I was recently diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And we both, and at the end of it, he gave me a hug, and he was like, if we had known about this years ago. Yeah. And I was like, so we're so appreciative of it now, because we went through the crap and the trauma because it wasn't diagnosed. Yeah. So, but when you're saying about like, did it help when I knew? It did, because then I could start trying to get a balance. Because before it was very extreme. It was like I was either Nikki or I was Emer, and there was no kind of middle ground. Okay. And that led to the extreme highs and extreme lows that are in BPD anyway, but it probably fed into them a little bit more. So,
when did things really start to go badly wrong?
For me, it would have been, like I say, it was always coming and going throughout my life, but COVID. And look, I learned when I was in treatment that COVID hit a lot of people. It was when their addiction took legs and ran a marathon, because people were isolated. We were afraid. We didn't know what was going on. For me,
it was a lonely time.
It was. And for me, I my relationship had broken up a couple of years before. So I was home alone. My drinking had got into a really bad state. My daughter was, living with her father. So I had nothing really, and I wasn't having to go into work because I was broadcasting from home. So I was accountable to nobody, literally nobody. I would wake up and I would be in my pajamas doing a show. So we used to live pre-record. So at 11 o'clock, I would start recording for a show that went live at 12. But I could have been up drinking until 7 a.m. So, I was extremely hungover, if not still a little bit drunk when I was going to record this show. But I had no one to be accountable to. Now, our program director, Andy, he was brilliant and he tried to work with me so much. And, he tried to help me along the way. But like he'd say, are you all right? He'd know there was something. I say, oh yeah, it's the medication I'm on, because the medication used to make me drowsy. So to be honest with you, it would have been a
combination. And drinking on it as well.
Yeah, a combination of both was like, a time bomb. But, got to the point where, they just, couldn't ignore it anymore. And, then I lost my job. So then I really had nothing to be accountable for.
There's nothing that hits your confidence, I don't think, more than losing your job.
Absolutely,
Completely.
Yeah. And, this time I knew, because I've lost my job before where it wasn't through fault of my own, but this time it was my own fault. And I knew deep down that it was. But then, I had no one at home with me. I had no job. My friends at that stage didn't know what to do for me anymore, and they started pulling back a little bit because some of them have their own kids and stuff, and they were like, But
also after COVID, people were sort of, the socializing didn't get back to the way it was, I don't think, in the same way.
No, it didn't. It didn't, because that's kind of defined even by the fact that nightclubs and everything are a thing in the past now. Yeah. So, it didn't go back to where it was, but they stepped away. My family had stopped talking to me because, Farah had gone to live with her dad and they just didn't know what was going on with my life. They couldn't watch me tear myself apart anymore. So I was on my own, and then I started hanging out with this group of people who, look, the guards themselves called them unsavoury, and that's been kind. But I let these people into my life, and I let them into my home, and they made sure that when I was in a bad place and I was being pulled down, I was definitely being pulled down to the gutter. Wow. Yeah, and but I do take accountability. I allowed them to do that. But yeah, they're the kind of people that you just, as a mother,
you were self-destructing.
I was self-destruct. I was imploding without a doubt. But I was bringing people along for the ride, and I was funding their ride at the same time. So, by the end of it, I was left penniless. I was left jobless. I was left homeless. I was left without anybody. And inevitably, by allowing those people into my life, I ended up sleeping on a park bench behind Jervis Street Shopping Centre. Or if I was lucky, because it was quite a sought after place, the side doorway for Penny's in Abbey Street beside the Lewis line, because you could kind of go into it. It was like a little alcove, so there was more shelter there, and but that was kind of taken quite early in the evening, so if you didn't get there, you didn't get there.
Who knew that was happening?
Very little people. So my family hadn't a clue. Where
did they think you were?
They thought I was staying with these people that I had been hanging around with, because that was the initial plan when I had lost the house, was that I would go stay with them. And I did for a couple of weeks, but the situation became very volatile. A lot of them were in addiction themselves. So I had to leave in the middle of the night, and I ended up on the streets. So they believed I was there. They wouldn't have been happy about it, but as far as they were concerned, she has a roof over her head. So they didn't know about it. I wasn't working anywhere, so nobody knew what was going on there. They just thought, she's not working anymore, and that was the end of that. My friends, like I said, had to pull away from me, so they hadn't a clue. And then it was just my sister in Florida, Anne, used to check in with me every so often, because she's just an amazing person. I know she's my sister, but she really is. She is a good person, and even at bad times, she'll find the best in someone. And she just kept trying to reach out to me. And then one day I was on the phone to her, and I just broke down and I told her everything, and she was horrified, shocked, couldn't believe it. And she rang my younger sister, Caroline, and between the two of them, they were like, right, this is it, this is game over. Things have got to change now. So they agreed to put me up in tourist hostels for a couple of weeks, but I had to go into rehab. So I had my name down in Coonwira, in Coolmine, but they kept on pushing Tiglin at me. Yeah. And I was 16 months, not a bloody chance. I was still, even at that point of desperation, I was I'm not going away somewhere for 16 months,
And when you were like living on the streets, were you still drinking? You were?
Yeah, I was still
Just
drinking.
to numb everything.
Just Brian Penny says it's the best way. When he did that series Hooked on RTE, he talked about when he used, it was to anaesthetize himself, and that really resonated with me, because I was like, my whole life I used to self-harm to release the pain, and then it was like addiction became my release for the pain. So, it was just trying to numb everything. So I was drinking. Like I would drink a bottle or two or wine and then fall asleep on a park bench. And like, when I say fall asleep, you're lucky if you get an hour, it's not sleep.
Yeah. I remember years, I think it was Dermot Bannon came in to talk about, the sleep out for Simon, and we're talking about like what it's actually really like. And, one of the things was noise, and it's just noise. Continually. Yeah,
well, my kind of regular spot was Wolftone Square behind Jervis Street Shopping Centre, and the reason that I picked there was because I was on my own, so I wasn't really hanging around with other people on the street, so I felt safe there because it was a square where there was like security cameras everywhere, but also it was where the delivery spot was for Jervis Shopping Centre. Yeah, so day and night there was stuff going on. Yeah. And
did you ever think, Dublin's a small place. People, you can't walk into town without bumping into someone. Did that happen?
No, it didn't. Or maybe I was just oblivious to it because I was traumatized when I was on the street. Literally went from place to place. I used to go from soup run to soup run. I never stood looking for money or anything like that. I used what social welfare I had or whatever at the time to survive. But, I didn't come across anyone that recognised me or me them. But what's weird is, in the last couple of months when I have gone back into Dublin city centre, because it took me a while to go back in again.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, and I actually made my way back and sat on the bench, which was quite a moment.
That must have been huge.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And I did it on my own. And I did it on my own for a reason, because it was something I needed to do, because I can't avoid a certain place for the rest of my life. But I didn't come across anyone I knew. But since I've gone back into Dublin, I've recognised faces that were very kind to me from the homeless community.
Wow.
And I've seen them, and they're still in that position. Like, I was there it was, August to November 2023 when I was homeless, but they are still there 2 years later. And that broke my heart, because I'm like, I know a lot of them are really good people. Like, there were two guys who used to sleep outside McDonald's on Henry Street. And whenever the guys were coming around with teas and coffees, they would send them around to me because they knew I was on my own. So they kind of look out for you, and they tell you,
Is there that community?
Yeah,
in
there
general?
is. There is. Absolutely. Yeah, there is. And, there is a great outreach service in Dublin city centre now. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the country, but for me, the Simon community were my lifeline. The outreach team used to come down to my bench most evenings and check in on me. If I was lucky, I'd get some emergency accommodation. That's like an odd night here or there. And I got accommodation in Ellis Quay, which is kind of up near Bargaintown along the Lewis line there. Looks like a big kind of prison cell from the outside, but by God, the heat hits you when you walk in there, and you're very appreciative of it. So, they were great to me. Also, the Lighthouse in Pearse Street, I used to go and get my lunch there. Yeah. And it was there that I was queuing up one day. And like I say, my sisters were saying, you've got to go to rehab. This is it. And I was queuing up, and I looked at the Lighthouse, and above their door, it said Tiglin at the Lighthouse. Yeah. And I was like, oh, wow, I wonder if that's the same place. Yeah. So there was a staff member minding the queue, because obviously they need security for something like that. And I just said to him, is that the same place as the rehab? And he was like, yeah, it is. And then he just stopped and looked at me, and he was like, would you like an assessment? And I went, yeah, actually I would. And he took me inside to one of the assessment officers, Edie, who was amazing. She used to ring me like at 11 o'clock at night to check on me, because when she saw me, she went into her supervisor and was like, we need to get her in. She is going to die. That girl is not streetwise. She's going to end up dead. And she knew that just by looking at me one time. Wow. But 2 weeks later, they got me into Tiglin, and I stayed there up until April this year. The 9th of April, I finished my aftercare. So
wow. How many months?
I'm now 19 months sober. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's incredible story. Do you know what I mean? Because I know we've talked before, previous to this, and all like when I sort of think about when we chatted then, we talked before in a different podcast, and I think about that all this was going to be ahead of you.
Yeah.
And it just seems so wrong.
Yeah.
You know,
had I known.
For anybody. But now you're back the other side. You're back working in East Coast.
Yeah. I am. And you know what? The career is coming back. And I'm blessed with East Coast because they're like family. I started working for them when I was 18, and, you know, they've always kind of been along my path somewhere along the way. And as soon as they, you know, like Sean Ashmore actually wrote to me when I was in rehab, and he was like, you know, if you want your career back, I'm very anxious to be the one to do that for you.
Wow.
Which, you know, was unbelievable. And the hardest thing for me is I'm doing things very slowly, kind of at my own pace, because I don't want to overwhelm myself, because I don't want to end up ever taking a step backwards. But for me, the big piece of work at the moment is restoration. And I have an 11-year-old daughter, and the hardest part for me is I have incredible guilt, and that is so crushing. I said it to the Independent. I let her down in the most phenomenal way, and I can never take that back, and that crushes me. And I find it very hard to live with. Very hard. But
you see, you know, in time and building step by step.
Yeah, and like I'm blessed because, you know, she has a phenomenal father. He's amazing, and no matter whatever happened with us, that we weren't for each other, I'm blessed to have him in her life. So, you know, I'll be incredibly grateful for him forever. But I've lost out on 5 years of my child, so, you know.
So you've huge grief.
Huge grief. Like even now when we're talking, I have tears. So
I know.
you know, I'll never get that back.
Yeah. How now you're bit by bit you're building and you're getting your career back, and you're being incredibly open and honest about your journey and about, you know, where you are now and how you've come to this place. How do you see yourself moving forward? Would you like to go back to the full-time radio gig? Would you like to just actually maybe veer off into helping other people? Yeah,
so like I'm doing some youth work at the moment with Tiglin, the rehab that I was in. So they have a youth sector in Greystones, and I'm actually working with the youth at the moment, teenagers. Wow. And I feel, you know, that's such a prominent age because, you know, that's where everything went wrong for me. I was 11. So I feel if you can reach them at that age, you know, it's really, really important. It might make a difference at the moment, but, you know, as their life progresses, they'll remember little things that were done for them in their teenage years. So it's something I'm really enjoying at the moment. I love radio. It's my passion. So I'm enjoying being back. Whether or not I could go back full time, I don't know, because like I say, I'm still very vulnerable. I'm still very hurt. I'm still very raw. And I don't think I'd be able for the pressures of it right now. My priority is, you know, my child. I am still technically homeless. I don't have a house. I live in a transitional home belonging to the rehabilitation centre. So I actually don't have a home. So that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. Because obviously as soon as I get a home, I can have my daughter and have her come stay and, you know, put her to bed and do all the normal things that I haven't been able to do. So, you know, that's kind of my priority. So working on radio is not my priority right now. I'm delighted to do it, and obviously being able to earn money is amazing again. But yeah, it's not my priority. My focus has shifted massively, and you know, I've learned that in life it's not things, it's people, and the people who I have in my life. Like I said, I've got, you know, 3 very strong friends, Paul, Ronan and Audrey, who've stuck by me through everything. When I was in rehab, they wrote me handwritten letters when I wasn't allowed to have phone calls. Then they made phone calls to me as soon as I came out. They met up with me. They've held me up through all this. They are the most important people to me, along with my family and my daughter. And apart from that, everything else is secondary, except for my recovery, because without my recovery, I don't have anything. So,
and as part of that recovery as well, you've been doing on Instagram. You've been doing little updates, and they're very important to watch. And I think because you're so positive, but you're also not afraid to show the days when you're low.
Yeah, I thought that was important because I've been reached out to a lot by families that are dealing with loved ones they can't reach who are in addiction at the moment, and they're desperate. And, they don't know what to do. But I've also been reached by people who are struggling, and they are consumed by that guilt and that shame that I'm still really, really struggling with. So, I think it's important for them to know that, because, that guilt and shame is, my counsellor has told me, is something that's going to be the hardest thing to kick. The substance, believe it or not, is quite easy to get rid of if you go to rehab, because it's not around you anymore. So that's quite easy to remove. But the guilt and the shame and the trauma, like when I went into treatment, I didn't speak. And it's mad to think this, for the first 5 months, it got to the point where the manager in the women's rehab was like, Emer, I don't know if we're going to be able to work with you, because I was mute. I didn't talk at all. And that was the traumatization from being on the streets. Bit by bit, I'm coming back to my life again. But I need to show people that you don't click your fingers and life's rosy again. If it was that easy, we'd all go on benders for years long and then come back and be normal again. It doesn't happen that way. The trauma you have as an addict and the trauma you have of someone who's experienced homelessness is going to be with you for life. And I think it needs to be real, and if it's not real, what's the point in telling the story in the first place?
Exactly. Finally, anybody listening that knows somebody that they think that needs help, and often that person doesn't want help, what should they do? Yeah,
well, the big problem is that, until the person is ready to admit they have a problem, you're almost shooting in the dark. But there's support there for you as the loved one, the concerned loved one. There are organisations like Al-Anon and places that will give you support. But, if you really, really want to get them support and you think there is a chance that they may be, convinced in some way, I know the assessment officers in Tiglin and in any other rehab will reach out, no problem. There's Dolores, Edie and Stephen in Tiglin. If you ring them on Pierce Street, they will definitely help you. But you've got Coolmine, you've got Francis Farm, you've got Ashery. There's so many rehabs. Thank God we've so many in this country. But there's assessment officers there that will bridge the gap for you and help you. So
thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Grief Pod with Venetia Quick. You can listen on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have an online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Instagram @GriefPod Series.